Hi! Today, we're here to do the story Where I Fit in the Story. We'll be asking Ken Wolf, my father, some questions about our genealogical history. We'll start off with, where did our family come from?
Our family?
Our family.
Well, it depends on whose side of the family you're talking
We're
about.
talking about the Wolf family.
My side of the family? Well, my mother's side of the family, both my mother and my father's side of the family come from different parts of Eastern Russia. No, actually it's Western Russia, Ukraine specifically. They come from areas called Kiev and Kishinev, which are part of Ukraine, I believe.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How do you know?
I think this is something I've known since I was very young. It was, I think my grandparents and my mother and my father let me know from the time I was pretty young that their families came from Eastern Europe, from Russia.
So it's just word of mouth.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Until the Ancestry.com results come back, of course. How many generations can you trace back from your parents?
Well, I know about my maternal grandparents, but I don't know anything further back than that. My mother's mother was one of 16 kids. My mother's father was one of 9. My mother's mother was the last of 16, and all of the rest of her siblings were born in Europe. My mother's father's family were mostly born in the States, but they were both first generation American in their families, and I don't know anything about their parents.
Okay. Can you recall any names? Tracing back. I know
might.
like 26 siblings in between them, so don't list all of them, please. God, don't list all of them. But
Well, my mother's side of the family, my mother had 70 some first cousins, so I don't know many of their names. I can't recall many names. I haven't seen a lot of those people for a very long time, but I do know that when we get together as a family, it was always a question of people reminding you what their names were and how they were related, because it was really confusing. They were big family get-togethers.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you remember the places of birth of your father's parents?
So my father's father was both of my father's parents were born in Russia.
Do you know where your father was born?
My father was born in Baltimore,
Gotcha.
and so was my mother.
This one's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Birthdays.
Mm-hmm.
You remember any birthdays?
Whose birthdays? My parents?
What were your parents' birthdays?
My father was born December 30th, I believe it was 1933. My mother was born June 9th, 1939.
So your dad was a Depression baby.
Right.
Lovely. Do we have any veterans in our family?
Yeah. Well, my dad was a veteran. My dad was in the he's in the Army. My brother, who is he's in the Army Reserves. My uncle on my father's side was in the Army, and I think actually not only two of my uncles were in the Army on my father's side. On my mother's side, I believe one of my uncles was in the Army, and I'm not sure whether that's the only one I know of. I think my other uncle on my mother's side may have gotten a deferment from serving in the military, because he went to law school, and so I don't know how that happened, but I don't recall him ever having been in the military.
So we're an Army family.
Yeah, I mean, as opposed to
as opposed to other branches.
Right, I gotcha.
Well, what's the army chant?
I don't know.
It's like oorah or something.
Yeah,
that's Marines.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Ruah, maybe.
Ruah, ooah.
Ooh-ah.
Yeah,
Ooh-ah!
that's it.
Okay. Can you tell me any interesting stories about our family?
Sure.
Pick one.
Pick one. Pick an interesting story. Well, let's see.
Rack that memory.
I'm trying to think of a specific interesting story to tell you. My mother and my grandmother, her mother, were very close. Especially, when my mother was, as an adult, when we were, teenagers. And I think part of it was because my mother was divorced when I was only 2 years old. So my grandmother and my mother spent a lot of time together because my mother was alone raising us. And so my brother and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And so they just got along very, very well. And I remember they used to take shopping trips and everything. And my grandmother and my mother both had a very, very great sense of humor and a big laugh. They were known for like a big laugh. And I remember one time, my grandmother, as she was getting older, she was recognizing that her memory wasn't as good as it had used to be. And she and my mother would take a trip, they were in Baltimore, but they would go to York, Pennsylvania, which was about, 45 minutes from Baltimore, to go shopping. And my mother told me that one time, on one of these trips out there, my mother asked my grandmother if she could remind her where the exit was that they would have to take to get off to go to the shopping centers in York, Pennsylvania. And my grandmother, who was worried that she would forget where the exit was, asked my mother if she could just tell her then where the exit was, instead of having to remind her and maybe forget that she was supposed to tell her where the exit was.
What about what your brother did to your mom at one time when he went driving with his friend?
Oh, that one, yeah. So my mother and her sister both had some hearing loss when they were young. My aunt was almost completely deaf and raised and taught how to do sign language and all of that. My mother had partial hearing loss, but she functioned pretty much like people who have good hearing. But she wore hearing aids. And there was this time when my brother was in high school, when he was learning how to drive, that he and his friend were sitting in the front seat. My brother was driving and his friend was in the passenger side. My mom was sitting in the back seat and my brother was driving. And my mother recalled hearing what she thought was mumbling coming out of the front seat. And she couldn't tell what was going on, but that was kind of common for her, that she would not necessarily hear everything that other people might hear. So, but she was trying to tune in, and she remembered hearing little things, little snippets from what my brother was saying and what his friend was saying back to him. It was sort of like she heard his friend saying things like, "Okay, a little faster, okay, a little slow down a little bit. No, to the right, a little bit to the left." And later on, she found out that my brother was trying to see if he could drive with his eyes closed and taking directions from his friend, who was telling him how to drive, while my mother was in the backseat not realizing what was going on.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
All right, and our last question.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any genealogical records? And if so, where are they?
You mean like a family tree, that kind of?
Written, I assume, yeah.
Some people on my mother's side of the family had gone to some trouble to create a family tree, and I believe we have a printed copy of that somewhere that includes several generations, and that's a very complicated family tree. Also hard to read because whoever's handwriting, they wrote it out in cursive, and it was really hard to read. My father's side, I don't think anything much is known beyond my father's parents' generation, because they were both immigrants from Russia, and my father, according to people I've talked to on my father's side of the family, they just did not discuss the old country at all. So I don't really know what that side of the family's like from before my father's parents' generation.
Gotcha. Well, that's all we have today for 60 Minutes with Enzo. We've been discussing our genealogical records. This will be available on YouTube if you guys missed it or you're just catching up on the last bit. You can you can tap in, see it whenever you'd like. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Remember, this is Enzo. This is my dad. Checking out.